Hi, I'm Annie Barrows, co-author with my Aunt Marianne Schaefer of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. I was so thrilled when I was invited to come to Guernsey for the Heritage 75 Festival celebrating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Guernsey from the Nazi occupation. And I was so disappointed when my visit was canceled because of this pandemic that's sweeping the globe. Now, during my visit, I had planned, of course, to go see some of my favorite sites in Guernsey. And I was going to go see the underground hospital for the first time, which I was very much looking forward to. But of course, I was going to give some talks, too. I was going to talk about the book, but I was also going to talk about the model that Guernsey's history has provided the rest of the world. And it seems to me that this has never been more true than it is today, because the people of Guernsey, and particularly the people of Guernsey during the war, provided the rest of the world with a model for how to endure isolation and separation from people we love. But even more, they have showed us all how to face uncertainty with grace and a sense of self and purpose. And so, once again, as always, I find myself in the position of saying thank you to the people of Guernsey for what your history has come to mean to the rest of us today. And I'm going to read to you a bit from an extremely fine novel called The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, written by Marianne Schaefer and by me. Now, when you do a reading, you are advised to start from the beginning, but I'm not going to do that. I am going to start with a letter from Dawsey Adams to Juliet Ashton. 31st January 1946. Dear Miss Ashton, I would like to correspond with you. I will answer your questions as well as I can. Though there are many who can tell a story better than I can, I will tell you the story of our roast pig dinner. I have a cottage and a farm left to me by my father. Before the war, I kept pigs and grew vegetables for St. Peter Port markets and flowers for Covent Garden. The pigs are gone now. The Germans took them away to feed their soldiers on the continent and ordered me to grow potatoes. We were to grow what they told us and nothing else. At first, before I knew the Germans, as I came to later, I thought I could keep a few pigs hidden for my own self. But the agricultural officer nosed them out and carried them off. Well, that was a blow, but I thought I'd manage all right, for potatoes and turnips were plentiful and there was still flour then. But it is a strange thing how the mind turns on food. After 6 months of turnips and a lump of gristle now and then, I was hard put to think about anything but a fine full meal. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Marjorie, sent me a note. "Come quick," it said, "and bring a butcher knife." I tried not to get my hopes up, but I set out for the manor house at a great clip, and it was true. She had a pig, a hidden pig, and she invited me to join in the feast with her and her friends. I never talked much while I was growing up. I stuttered badly, and I was not used to dinner parties. To tell the truth, Mrs. Marjorie's was the first one I was ever invited to. I said yes because I was thinking of the roast pig, but I wished I could take my piece home and eat it there. It was my good luck that my wish didn't come true, because that was the first meeting of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, though we didn't know it then. The dinner was a rare treat, but the company was better. With talking and eating, we forgot about clocks and curfews until Amelia, that's Mrs. Marjorie, heard the chimes ring 9 o'clock. We were an hour late. Well, the good food had strengthened our hearts, and when Elizabeth McKenna said we should strike out for our rightful homes instead of skulking in Amelia's house all night, we agreed. But breaking curfew was a crime. I'd heard of folks being sent to prison camp for it, and keeping a pig was a worse one, so we whispered and picked our way through the fields quiet as could be. And we would have come out all right if not for John Booker. He'd drunk more than he'd eaten at dinner, and when we got to the road, he forgot himself and broke into song. I grabbed hold of him, but it was too late. 6 German patrol officers suddenly rose out of the trees with their Lugers drawn and began to shout, "Why were we out after curfew? Where had we been and where were we going?" I couldn't think what to do. If I ran, they'd shoot me, I knew that much. My mouth was dry as chalk, my mind was a blank, so I just held on to Booker and hoped. Then Elizabeth drew in her breath and stepped forward. Elizabeth isn't tall, so those pistols were lined up at her eyes, but she didn't blink. She acted like she didn't see any pistols at all. She walked up to the officer in charge and started talking. You never heard such lies. How sorry she was that we had broken curfew. How we had been attending a meeting of the Guernsey Literary Society, and the evening's discussion of Elizabeth and her German garden had been so delightful we had all lost track of time. Such a wonderful book. Had he read it? None of us had the presence of mind to back her up, but the patrol officer couldn't help himself. He had to smile back. Elizabeth is like that. He took our names and ordered us very politely to report to the commandant the next morning. Then he bowed and wished us good evening. Elizabeth nodded, gracious as could be, while the rest of us edged away, trying not to run like rabbits. Even lugging Booker, I got home quick. And that is the story of our roast pig dinner. Yours sincerely, Dawsey Adams. From Amelia Marjorie to Juliet Ashton, 18th February 1946. Dear Miss Ashton, Dawsey has told you that the society was invented as a ruse to keep the Germans from arresting my dinner guests, Dawsey, Isola, Eben Ramsey, John Booker, Will Thisbe, and our dear Elizabeth McKenna, who manufactured the story on the spot. Bless her quick wits and silver tongue. I, of course, knew nothing of their predicament at the time. As soon as they left, I made haste down to my cellar to bury the evidence of our meal. The first I heard of our literary society was the next morning at 7, when Elizabeth appeared in my kitchen and asked, "How many books have you got?" Well, I had quite a few, but Elizabeth looked at my shelves and shook her head. "We need more," she said. "There's too much gardening here." She was right, of course. I do like a good garden book. "I'll tell you what we'll do," she said. "After I'm done at the commandant's office, we'll go to Fox's bookshop and buy them out. If we're going to be the Guernsey Literary Society, we have to look literary." Oh, I was frantic all forenoon, worrying over what was happening at the commandant's office. What if they all ended up in the Guernsey jail, or worst of all, in a prison camp on the continent? The Germans were erratic in dispensing their justice, so one never knew what sentence would be imposed. But nothing of the sort occurred. Odd as it may sound, the Germans allowed and even encouraged artistic and cultural pursuits among the Channel Islanders. Their object was to prove to the British that the German occupation was a model occupation. How this message was to be conveyed to the outside world was never explained, as the telephone and telegraph cable between Guernsey and London had been cut the day the Germans landed in June 1940. But whatever their skewed reasoning, the Channel Islands were treated much more leniently than the rest of conquered Europe. At first. At the commandant's office, my friends were ordered to pay a small fine and submit the name and membership list of our society. The commandant announced that he, too, was a lover of literature. Might he, with a few like-minded officers, sometimes attend meetings? Elizabeth told them they would be most welcome. And then she, Eben, and I flew to Fox's, chose armloads of books for our newfound society, and rushed back to the manor house to put them on my shelves. Then we strolled from house to house, looking as carefree and casual as we could, in order to alert the others to come that evening and choose a book to read. Oh, it was agonizing to walk slowly, stopping to chat here and there when we wanted to scurry. Timing was vital, since Elizabeth feared the commandant would appear at the next meeting a bare 2 weeks away. He did not. A few German officers did attend over the years, but thankfully left in some confusion and did not return. And so it was that we began. I knew all our members, but I did not know them all well. Dawsey had been my neighbor for over 30 years, and yet I don't believe I had ever spoken to him of anything more than weather and farming. Isola was a dear friend, and Eben too, but Will Thisbe was only an acquaintance, and John Booker nearly a stranger, for he had only just arrived when the Germans came. It was Elizabeth we had in common. Without her urging, I would never have thought to invite them to share my pig, and the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society would never have drawn breath. That evening, when they came to my house to make their selections, those who had rarely read anything other than scripture, seed catalogs, and the Pigman's Gazette discovered a different kind of reading. It was here Dawsey found his Charles Lamb, and Isola fell upon Wuthering Heights, and for myself, I chose the Pickwick Papers, thinking it would lift my spirits, which it did. Then each of us went home and read. We began to meet, for the sake of the Commandant at first, and then for our own pleasure. None of us had any experience with literary societies, so we made our own rules. We took turns speaking about the books we'd read. At the start, we tried to be calm and objective, but that soon fell away, and the purpose of the speakers was to goad the listeners into wanting to read the book themselves. Once two members had read the same book, we could argue, which was our great delight. We read books, talked books, argued over books, and became dearer and dearer to one another. Other islanders asked to join us, and our evenings together became bright, lively times. We could almost forget, now and then, the darkness outside. Yours most sincerely, Amelia Marjorie. From Eben Ramsay to Juliet Ashton, 28th February 1946. Dear Miss Ashton, Mrs. Marjorie said you would like to have letters about our reading during the occupation. I was never going to talk or think, if I could help it, about those days, but Mrs. Marjorie said we could trust to your judgment in writing about the society during the war. If Mrs. Marjorie says you can be trusted, I believe it. Also, you had such kindness to send my friend Dawsey a book, and he, all but unknown to you, so I am writing to you, and I hope it will be a help to your society. Best to say we weren't a true literary society at first. Aside from Elizabeth, Mrs. Marjorie, and perhaps Booker, most of us hadn't had much to do with books since our school years. We took them from Mrs. Marjorie's shelves, fearful that we would spoil the fine papers. I had no zest for such matters in those days. It was only by fixing my mind on the Commandant in jail that I could make myself lift up the cover of the book and begin. It was called Selections from Shakespeare. Later, I came to see that Mr. Dickens and Mr. Wordsworth were thinking of men like me when they wrote their words, but most of all, I believe William Shakespeare was. Mind you, I cannot always make sense of what he says, but it will come. It seems to me that the less he said, the more beauty he made. Do you know what sentence of his I admire the most? It is, "The bright day is done, and we are for the dark." Oh, I wish I'd known those words on the day I watched those German troops land, plane load after plane load of them, and come off ships down in the harbor. All I could think of was, damn them, over and over. If I could have thought the words, "The bright day is done, and we are for the dark," I'd have been consoled somehow and ready to go out and contend with circumstances instead of my heart sinking to my shoes. They came here on Sunday, 30th June, 1940, after bombing us 2 days before. They said they hadn't meant to bomb us. They mistook our tomato lorries on the pier for army trucks. How they came to think that strains the mind. They bombed us, killing some 30 men, women, and children. One among them was my cousin's boy. He had sheltered underneath his lorry when he first saw the planes dropping bombs, and it exploded and caught fire. They killed men in their lifeboats at sea. They strafed the Red Cross ambulances carrying our wounded. When no one shot back at them, they saw the British had left us undefended. They just flew in peaceably 2 days later and occupied us for 5 years. At first, they were as nice as could be. They were that full of themselves for conquering a bit of England, and they were thick enough to think it would just be a hop and a skip till they landed in London. When they found out that wasn't to be, they turned back to their natural meanness. Oh, they had rules for everything. Do this, don't do that. But they kept changing their minds, trying to seem friendly, like they were poking a carrot in front of a donkey's nose. But we weren't donkeys, so they'd get harsh again. For instance, they were always changing curfew, 8 at night or 9 or 5 in the evening if they felt really mean-spirited. You couldn't visit your friends or even tend to your stock. We started out hopeful, sure they'd be gone in 6 months, but it stretched on and on. Food grew hard to come by, and soon there was no firewood left. Days were gray with hard work, and evenings were black with boredom. Everyone was sickly from so little nourishment and bleak from wondering if it would ever end. We clung to books and to our friends. They reminded us that we had another part to us. Elizabeth used to say a poem. I don't remember all of it, but it began, "Is it so small a thing to have enjoyed the sun, to have lived light in the spring, to have loved, to have thought, to have done, to have advanced true friends?" It isn't. I hope wherever she is, she has that in her mind. My wishes for your health, Evan Ramsey. Thank you.